Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I would like to welcome you to Breath is Everywhere, an exhibition featuring the work by Liu Shiming and Linnéa Gad, curated by me. Maëlle Ebelle, I'm the gallery director and the curator here at the Liu Shiming Art Foundation. But I want first to thank our guest tonight, Linnéa Gad and Ariana Kalliga. So tonight we will have a talk about this exhibition, about the perception also from Linnéa regarding this show. And this conversation will be followed by some Q&A. So if you have some questions, please keep them with you and we can work on that later. So first, I would like to introduce the foundation, which was funded in 2021. The work of the foundation is to preserve and to share the legacy of Liu Shiming works, who was a Chinese artist who was born in 1926 in Tianjin, China. He was trained at the Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing, and in the 60s he decided to go to the countryside and started working on the everyday life of the people living there. In the 70s, he returned to Beijing, where he started to work on smaller pieces. He was originally trained to work on more monumental works, and he started to work on more like precious, intimate, and smaller works that you can discover here in this exhibition. He died in 2010, and he's considered as one of the most important sculpture artists for the 20th century for the Chinese art. Tonight, we are going to talk about his work, but also about Linnéa's work. So Linnéa is a visual artist from Stockholm, Sweden. She graduated from Columbia University in 2022. She has been presented some solo projects in New York, such as Return of the Mollusk, Erratic, and Shoal in New York. But she's also has participated to the show, some group show at the Jewish Museum in New York, and the 68 Art Institute in Copenhagen. Earlier this year, River Valley Arts Collective presented Peelings, a series of newly commissioned work installed at the Held Foundation Studio. She also received grants from the Swedish Arts Grant Committee and was shortlisted for the Frankenthaler Climate Art Awards in 2022. Our second guest is Ariana Kalliga, a curator working with media and research-based practice, exploring connection between infrastructure and ecology. She's currently the curator, the assistant curator at Ament in Brooklyn, and she was previously working for MoMA, the Verilist Center of Arts and Politics, and the Norman Foster Foundation. Ariana curated exhibition in France, in Greece, and in the US. And in 2022, she edited Artist-Run Dialogue, a publication on transnational collaboration between artist-run and nonprofit organizations. She held an MA in Curatorial Studies from CCS Bard and a BA in History of Art from Oxford University. While at Bard, she collaborated with Linnéa on the course Ecotone, How to Curate a Landscape, developing a reading program and question inspired by Linnéa.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you so much to Maëlle for this invitation, and to Linnéa for this invitation, and of course to the Liu Shiming Foundation. It is such a pleasure to be here, and it's truly a pleasure also to be in conversation again with Linnéa, following our collaboration at Bard, and also years-long collaborations, conversations. I remember the first time that I met you, which was actually on a studio visit. And it was a 4-hour-long visit through your incredible studio upstate, and through all the different mediums of your practice and research and reference points. I remember this board full of incredible kind of topographical maps that you had laid out, and I just knew that I had to continue being in conversation with you. And I, coming to the show, I was really curious, first of all, about the dialogue we see here between Linnéa's work and Liu Shiming's work. And I was wondering, as a sort of opening question, if you could both talk to me about where this idea came from for this conversation and what the starting point was for the show.
So I've been like newly appointed as the gallery director and curator here at the Liu Shiming Art Foundation. So Linnéa is my first curation here. So it was a challenge to find a profile that aligns also with the spirit of the foundation. But I remember like 2 years ago, I was working for a commercial gallery, and Linnéa was included in a group show curated by Maëlle Ebelle, who is here tonight with us. And that was the first time that I saw Linnéa's work. Afterward, she had an exhibition at Astor Weeks in in Chinatown. And I discovered your new work, because at the time that was like very new, like all the work with the glass pieces that we have here. We have 3. We have the wall piece, which is like behind you, and then like the 2 pieces on the pedestal. And I remember being like completely amazed by that. Also, you had like some beautiful standing sculptures working with also like the cardboard, and I was like very intrigued, and I wanted to see more also at the time. But, time flies. You don't get to do whatever you want to do when you want to do it. So I had to wait a little bit. And when I joined the foundation here, after a conversation with our artistic advisor, Melissa Lazarov, who is also with us tonight, we thought that it would be like a great idea to start a conversation with you and working on this project. And I remember like browsing the inventory at the foundation and coming across this piece, like the 2 birds that you have in the middle of the platform here. And I don't know, it just like clicked in my mind, and I was like, this is very interesting to see also like the ceramic being like trapped in this like metallic cage. And at the same time, I was remembering your show with this glass being trapped in this like metallic like armor. And that just like made sense like right away. And that's also why I contacted you in the first place, because I thought that maybe with the materiality and the way you approach your sculpture, it will just like make sense to do something together. And then I had this amazing opportunity for you to, like, you came here, we had this amazing conversation, and I was like, whoa, this is amazing. Like, we're on the same page. It feels like very like normal and very like smooth in the way that we can work together. And I went to your studio, and as you were saying, Ariana, beautiful, beautiful studio, beautiful studios, if I may. And I remember like seeing pilaster, like the 2 pieces that you have in the reverse wall. And I was like, okay, so there is definitely something that we can do with all those beautiful pieces. And after conversation, we came with this idea of like this big pedestal, the way that we can just like create like a new way to navigate into an exhibition and to approach a dialogue between 2 artists.
I think it's interesting to think about like how this all started, because I feel like you had kind of a really good curatorial intuition, just that our works would really, that there was some kinship between our works. And I mean, I think it's still today, I feel like I have a hard time to like fully articulate what it is that like really connects our work. I mean, we keep coming back to this idea that there's this porous quality in both of our works, and and that's also what the title kind of refers to. Breath is everywhere. And when I got to like look through the catalog of his works for the first time, and seeing not only the things that were like on Google Images, but seeing the whole inventory and going through each works, and also selecting the works that I really connected with, I found like, you know, I think I also really connected with the works that were like a little bit more scrappy, and that had this kind of, they had the remnants of the artist's hand, and they were left in this kind of more state of becoming. And so yeah, I think there's like it is really hard to like put your finger on, but there is like there is this kind of I mean, I've been saying like there's the breath that's left in a work, you know, when you like kind of leave it slightly unfinished, or it's just, it has this kind of porous quality. And but then the more I like learn about Liu Shiming, the more kind of I've been reading about him, I realized that our connections are like also more and more deeper. And I think that's really interesting to like, you first have this kind of intuition, and then I can see that we have so much common ground, even though we are, you know, we're working in a different time era, and we come from different landscapes and places. But my work is very connected to the Stockholm archipelago and that landscape and geology and time, and his work is very connected to the Chinese landscape and the people who are living in the countryside and working that land. But something I found out recently, is that he also had this great interest in Neolithic, prehistoric works, and you can see these, like actually two of my favorite works of his is called The Human Jar, and it's these clay works that are like, look like vessels, but also have these kind of figures coming out of them, and they're referencing these Neolithic works done by humans who lived in what is now China around 3,500 BC, and they made these incredible vessels, and some of those vessels also had these kind of like figures coming out of them. So that's really what he was referencing in those work. And I, on the other hand, I've been looking a lot at these pre-pottery Neolithic humans who lived in the Fertile Crescent, 9,500 BC, who worked a lot in like lime mortar and in limestone. And so I think we both have these kind of prehistoric peers that we've been looking at, and so I thought that was really kind of remarkable, you know. And I think there's a lot of things like that kind of keeps coming up.
And that really connects to something I remember you talking about, which is this kind of appreciation you have and this interest in kind of this, these scholar stones, as you call them, or as they're called. Yeah. And I was wondering if you could kind of elaborate more on that, because that's something that perhaps, you know, when people initially see the dialogue between your work, it's not immediately apparent. No. Like you talk about breath, and breath is everywhere, and there's definitely this sense that there are vessels here, and breath is almost suspended, yeah, or it's contained, or it's escaping the vessels. But what there's also is this kind of preoccupation with the ground and the stone. I was wondering if you could expand.
Earth and clay, and but yeah, so I. For a long time have had this appreciation for something called gongshi, also known as scholar stones, which is in Chinese tradition, it means respected stones. And scholar stones are generally made out of karstic limestone. because limestone is a water-soluble rock, so it can be shaped and formed into these incredible formations. One of my favorite things to do, which I recommend you all to do, is to go to the Met, and they have an incredible whole wing, kind of, it's like an indoor garden with these scholar rocks, and it's actually like also a very tranquil place in New York, because it's very few people who are in that wing, in those rooms. But these stones have like been, some of them are like perforated and pitted with holes, and they have the shapes of like a rising wave or a mountain, or like some of them are really like smooth and have look like silky folds in the sea, and they're not only like prized for their beauty, but also the way like Chinese literati, they look at these stones with this respect and treat them like, when you see one of these stones, it's like meeting a brother, a friend, or a master. And I connect with this a lot because growing up in the Stockholm archipelago, I've had a very great relationship with stones, always playing a lot with stones. And I think one of my first kind of creative, like my first moments of like kind of creative inventiveness is like picking up a stone, examining its surface, and then imagining what this stone could be. And I feel like I kind of interacted with this landscape I grew up with, and kind of transfigured it so that like I would see a whale in an islet, or like a camel in a windswept pine. So I really connected to this Eastern tradition of like seeing like a mountain in a stone, and then connecting this to Liu Shiming is that like having this in, this being something I've been reading about scholar stones, been interested in for quite some time. When I first came across his work, I immediately thought about scholar stones, because I feel like his work has this kind of character it's not only like the figures that's in its work. I feel like they have a character just like as a sculpture in itself. And I think especially the one piece that really struck me to have this kind of scholar stone quality was Gangling San, which is the largest piece on this platform, this green bronze. And I think because that piece really looks like for me, it looks like it was a man was been kind of like carved out of this mountain, and it's still kind of like half man, half mountain. And it's both kind of like terrifying. It's like, like how like a mountain can really have like characters. Like upstate, the mountains are like so kind and soft, and this is kind of like a really like terrifying mountain.
I think we can also talk about like the simplicity of the gesture in Liu Shiming, which I think resonate also in your work. Like how, like when you heard about my proposal, which was like a little bit like express also in some ways, how do you navigate with that idea and that perception coming from his work, like relating to your work?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I feel like I can tell that he was a very confident sculptor, and I think wasn't afraid of leaving his marks, and yeah, and I think I also, I mean, I think I also, I don't know, I feel like I do maybe a move or a gesture, and I don't know. I feel like my work is also very kind of following intuition and also letting the material guide me a lot. So it's very much a collaboration with the material, and I could sense that he was also very much like collaborating with the clay. Yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah, that brings us to kind of what we see here in such detail is this kind of these nuances of materials that kind of reoccur. We have, you know, if you notice the one right there with the paper pulp, there's another one in the series, and they start to emerge as kind of little constellations.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, because there's definitely a way in which I start to notice and distinguish them based on like a kind of building up of material that I see in your work.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, as you've also called it, a kind of a cumulative process.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you could kind of talk to us about that, how that also relates to questions that you're interested in related to kind of the environment and ecology, but also just intimately related to how you work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what's really, it's been nice when I do, been taking people through this exhibition is because I feel like I can kind of tell the story about like how I came to work with all these materials through the works that are in front of us. And 5 or almost 6 years ago, I learned that limestone is made from marine organisms building up their shells and structure with calcium carbonate, and then when they die and decompose on the ocean floor, you know, their shells and structures become limestone. And I was just so moved by this information, and because I think I was already very interested in ideas of kind of vibrant matter and these more environmental ways of thinking about materials. And then I felt like, wow, this material really is alive, and learning more about the life cycle of lime has been like the kind of locus to all my work ever since. And I often say that I try to sculpt like a mollusk makes its shell in layers, accumulative layers over time. And on this platform you see 2 of my lime mortar works. One is the boomling, which is this rock one that sits in this like metal cradle, and then there's balmed at the end there, which is like kind of slightly blue tinted. And so learning this about the mollusk and how it makes its shell and the life cycle of lime, I started to sculpt in lime, in different variations of lime. So this piece, Boomling, is made out of lime mortar and crushed oyster shells, put together in a way that's it's also traditionally called oyster tabby. So it's you know, the first layer was probably like this big, and I mix my own mortar, and then I put in crushed oyster shells and also goat hair because that works this kind of organic fiberglass to hold it together. And then you scratch the surface, and then I add another layer of lime mortar after 72 hours, and I kept building like that. So probably to make this piece, maybe it was like 6 layers in order to get to that final piece. And then I left the scratch layer exposed. And then for the piece balmed over there, I also I added a final layer where I concealed the scratch layer, and it has this bueno fresco of lapis lazuli. And then from one of the things I loved so much about sculpting with lime mortar and was the fact that essentially I was using different variations of one material. I was using you know, lime mortar and oyster shells, which are both calcium carbonates, and they wanted to bind with themselves. And I also, in other works that are not here, I was also using limestone. And after working with these lime sculptures for a while, which are very labor intensive and high maintenance, I wanted to move on to another material, and then I just started working with something that was just very accessible and easygoing, like cardboard. And so, but then I approached it in this very similar way to how I sculpted with my lime mortar. It's cardboard and paper pulp, and so it's like one material connected to itself. And then the paper pulp was kind of the way I was attaching it, following these kind of like folds and cracks in the cardboard. They also started resembling barnacles, and this was just something I didn't really intend, but it just the way they turned out. And then barnacles also being a form of marine biogenic calcification, there was this connection. And then I started working with metal. You have some of my like sheet metal pieces with that I often cover in welding slag. So it's like, again, one material attached to itself, and then having this kind of accumulation of slag built up in a very similar way that I build the lime mortar and the cardboard, and then also on this platform there's ceramic pieces, like this yellow piece Koya, and Do Tell this orange piece, and the white four-legged sculpture Creamer, and Islet Ramp. They're all made from cardboard pieces or twigs and bark that I've been dipping in slip, and then when I fire those, the inside of those pieces burn out, so they become these ceramic shells. And the way I like build up the slip for months is also in this kind of very like accumulative way that's connected to the cardboard and then the lime and the metal. And then all of these materials then also kind of being bark, shells, sheet metal, porcelain, cardboard. They're these forms of like container and shell materials. So sorry, that's like a very long, but that's just to say that that's how this little ecosystem of works have kind of been generated, and all of these kind of start to influence each other. I mean, lastly, maybe I should say something about the glass pieces, which is kind of one of my latest developments, where I've had this feeling I wanted to return the mollusk into the shells, because I've been making all these shell structures, and so I wanted the mollusk to come back into my work, and that happened through amber glass. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Just a tiny brief addition to your comment about the tabby, how I love how you use this material, but also the ways that, it's such an ancient form of kind of building, yeah, of making dwellings, of a sort of alternative to cement.
Yeah.
And I think something that we see here also running through your work is this kind of interest in, as you were saying, maybe containers, but also what I see is a kind of like certain fragments of infrastructures as well, yeah, or the ways in which certain materials have been used to actually build, yeah, larger containers than a sort of mollusk or, a shell.
Totally.
And Maëlle, I'd love to pass it on to you, and really also ask you about the exhibition design and the platform we're sitting in front of as well.
Yeah, so I think that was one of our first conversation. Like when you came to the gallery, like we had a look on the work we wanted to work with. And I'm not like a big fan of the multiplication of pedestal in a space. And you referred to Simone Fatale exhibition at the PS1. And I had the thought also about having like a big platform where like all the work could have like a dialogue, like a direct dialogue. So that was like very interesting to align on that, like even like without having like a, you know, pure conversation about how we're going to display that. And this idea also to create like one space for all those sculptures was like very interesting to me because, you know, when you have like one pedestal, one sculpture, you turn around or you have a quick look and you move on to the next one. Here you are like, you have to take the time. You have to pause a little bit to explore like all the sculpture on the pedestal. And I think that was also what we wanted to do here. Allowed people to just like take a time to observe what they have, what you have in front of you, take the time to explore. And when came also like when we were talking about like the dimension, because it's a big pedestal, we were thinking about like how many pieces could fit on that pedestal. So when we installed that pedestal, and when we made the display, that was also like very interesting to see how we could like navigate with all those ideas. And I remember during the opening night, having some people questioning, like being like, who is who on this pedestal? Like who did what? And I think from there, like the challenge was, you know, done. Like we made it work. Having this kind of confusion was also like very interesting because some people were not familiar with Liu Shiming's practice, so that was also like very interesting. And to see how people were like questioning what was happening on the pedestal was very interesting in a way that they had to kind of play Cluedo and try to find who was who in the pedestal. And I like that. I really did like that. And the fact also that we mixed different techniques on the pedestal is also very important to me, because like sculpture for like most of people is also like either wood or like steel, but it's not like cardboard, it's not you know, glass. So that was also like very interesting to just like having this mix presentation with all those beautiful pieces coming together. And the rest of the show, because we have like 24 pieces on this pedestal, so it's also very interesting to see that we have like a crowded pedestal here. But it feels still like very breathy in some ways. So it's also like very interesting to navigate with all those information. I remember also during the install, like when we were just the two of us like working on this installation, having to discuss like how we wanted to articulate the entire like display for this, like not having something like coming down or having something like more wavy. And some ways, in that way, like people could see like everything from everywhere around the platform, which was also very important in the idea of the display. And for the rest of the show, like the second room, let's say the second room, it's also interesting because like it just like creates some, you know, some pauses. You have to go to one sculpture and to the next one and to the next one to have this entire vision around the show. So I think it's also very important for like what we tried to achieve here, saying like take the time and observed. So yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, this idea of kind of bringing all of the works together, the questions of authorship that then come into play, and I'd love to hear Linnéa's thoughts on that. But also kind of, you know, when you see these sort of platforms of pedestals in museums, oftentimes, you know, there's a sort of hierarchy or order that's imposed, or you see them in certain, you know, museological displays, more like larger scale vitrines, or things that are also showing, you know, works, again, alluding to prehistory or to kind of longer spans of time, but then you also see them as sort of, you know, in a form of procession or in a form of kind of order. But what I like here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is kind of the fact that I don't feel that there's this linear or like orderly kind of assembly in a way.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I have in the past, in other shows, I've made kind of the gesture of having kind of a low platform and showing like clusters of work. So that's kind of like a move I've made before. But with this, for this show, I really, and with the architecture of this space and like looking at these big, these big tiles, which we kind of used as measurements, I felt very strongly that it needed to kind of be a real like block and not be something low, but still create something where we get the sense of like a landscape, and also just really like have a real dialogue between us that where our, and I maybe going back to that idea of like porousness and the title of the show too, this feeling that are like really like daring to like blend our works, and I thought that was really fun. And I love when people start to questioning, you know, I love when people get curious about materials, but also it was great people questioning like whose work, and so I think that was engaging. But I don't know what was else that you asked me. But
That was exactly
yeah.
To me, also the fact that you're sharing like the same platform place both of your work, like, you know, in the same like level of reading. Like there is no one taking over the other one. So that's also for me like very important, because it's like we try to balance also this. And I think it's essential in that kind of dialogue. So, yeah.
I guess the one thing that was really fun, I mean, it was so fun to install this platform and playing with the textures. I mean, I work a lot in sculpture at the moment, but my background was also in painting and making landscape paintings, and I think I still kind of like am a landscape painter at heart, and like the feeling of having these different like textures and colors and forms interact, and you have so many interesting viewpoints as you walk around this platform. And and one thing that really like struck me too was how great it was to see like some of his works from the sides that weren't completely figurative, and that also kind of like made the dialogue more interesting too, because I feel like his work became more abstract when they were mixed with mine, and that where you also could just get certain views where it wasn't maybe so apparent that they had this like figure as well.
And I think you already touched on this, but maybe as a kind of final question before we also move into Q&A, I was wondering again about the kind of rest of the show, sort of how you chose the glasswork there, which you positioned on the wall right there, and how you sort of selected the works that you chose to individually display as well of Liu Shiming. And I understand that his works here are really from the last 2 decades of his life. And yeah, it's really interesting how you talk about that progression of his career into a greater abstraction, although we still see a lot of figuration in the works.
I think for the second room, that was also like very interesting, because we had like some conversation about like bigger pieces also included in the show when I was at your studio, and I remember like having like a a big crush on pilaster. When I arrived, I just like saw the piece and I was like, okay, this, yes, we are talking about like the two pieces in the reverse wall. I remember being like, I really want that piece being included in the show, and we had the very good surprise to find out when we took out the camel, which is also in the second room, to find out that like the back of the camel has like those squares going inside the sculpture. And if you look at pilaster, like you have some squares coming out of the painting. That's the painting, yeah, the cardboard sculpture painting, and the display for that piece was like kind of obvious that it needed its own space. And when we had this camel like coming into the room for the install, like that just like made sense to make them resonate one to each other. So for those pieces, that was very natural. Then we also had this conversation about having like a standing piece included in the show, because that was also what I knew from you, and I wanted to have that piece, also one of the pieces like that. And you offered to produce like a new piece for the show, and we have this beautiful opportunity to present that piece in the second room as well, which entered into conversation with the camel and pilaster, which is also like very interesting, because even though you like, of course you're aware about like the list of works, but like there is like kind of a mimicking kind of very far, but like there is this interesting conversation between the cardboard piece, the camel, and pilaster into that piece. So like having them working together is also very interesting. For the small piece, which is just right there on this like single pedestal, to me, it refers like to one piece which is included to this pedestal, which is Hazard, the very thin steel piece next to the boat. I don't know if everybody can identify the piece. But like in this tradition, you know, like this is a court musician from Chinese culture, so it's like very interesting. And the fact that also like the entire dynamic about the Chinese history and culture is also about like, you know, those like shadow puppet shows. It's also like very interesting to have this like trying to have a conversation from afar. So I wanted also to just like have those moments where you could just like see those pieces as like little gem, which is also the case with the piece on the wall, which I think it's just beautiful. And the fact that it creates like kind of a punctuation inside of the install for this show is like very interesting, because like you're not used to see a piece on such a small wall, but because of the height of it, which is Linnéa's idea, create also like a time for you to just like pause and being like surprised to have one piece like this in the middle of like this very small and tiny wall. So that's also very interesting to see how we created some pause moment inside that exhibition room.
Would you want me to read this quote? Well, yeah, so also we made these nice catalogs where it has all the works of mine that are included in this exhibition, alongside all the works of Liu Shiming that's selected for this exhibition. And I wrote an essay in this catalog where I write a lot about gongshi and scholar's stones, but I also found this really nice quote by Liu Shiming that I thought I just would end our little talk with, which I thought was really moved me. I want my life to be present in all my works, so that after my death, my friends could still dialogue in silence simply by casting their eyes on my art. Liu. So yeah. thank you.
And I guess we'll open for questions. If anyone would like to ask us anything about the show, Linnéa about her practice, and Maëlle, of course, please raise your hand.
To Linnéa, just curious about what you're thinking about next, and where you're going to go from here with the mollusks and the bio creations.
Well, I feel like I'm at this moment where I feel like I'm in a very like generative and inspired moment where I feel that maybe I'm like not going to add so many more materials to my practice, and I feel like I kind of really just want to continue playing around with these materials and see how they can kind of like cross-reference each other and how different forms and materials will influence each other, and yeah, it's been very like I've been finding that like how these work really kind of they get more and more connected as I continue making new works, like the bonds between them and their connections become more complex, and yeah, so I'm just kind of enjoying that at the moment, or I think that's where I want to continue.
And I'm also remembering how you had a very busy summer of making quite a large body of work outside, or at least entirely installed outside, upstate, and I was wondering, building on that question, do you have plans to kind of keep showing work or kind of experimenting with where you are upstate and kind of responding to the landscape in the way that show, which please, remind me the peelings had?
I think, I mean, the one thing I've been saying that, you know, I'm very much a marine life person, obviously, and now I'm stranded in the mountains. But then I've come to realize that actually where we are is it's an ancient seafloor because there's a lot of limestone around. So it's kind of even more perfect for my work in some ways. And so I would love to spend some more time going. There's some really interesting places, like in Rosendale, there's one of the first cement factories and quarries. There's also this petrified forest in Cairo I would like to really explore. And lastly, I've been making some sculptures using this Onondaga limestone from Buffalo, New York, and I would love to go up and get some more stones, reclaimed stones to work with. So, yeah.
I was wondering if I've never really thought of your work as having within each piece a very particular narrative, but seeing it in dialogue with these pieces like the two birds or even the vessels that are these very particular characters, it does bring out something in some of these sculptures of yours that makes me think of characters. And I'm just wondering, you know, where you see kind of little narratives or character-based suggestions basically coming out of your more abstract works.
I love that question. I mean, I was saying that maybe his work was starting to look a little bit more abstract with mine, and I think maybe my work then started becoming more figurative also in relationship to his. And for me, I mean, I think that's why I brought up the gongshi and the scholar stones, this idea that like a stone can have like a character and a personality, something I so deeply relate to. And I love the idea that even though my sculptures are like per se abstract, like I like when they get personalities and have like a character, and I mean that's when I think that's what I consider a successful sculpture to me is when it gets that kind of quality. Yeah, and they become a little bit like a friend, or more than just something abstract. So, yeah.
You definitely see that in Linnea's essay and text, the way you write about your work, which feels like it's following a narrative, and you accompany your work with words, and you like to kind of expand on your work through writing, which I think is really beautiful. Well, if there's no more questions, we want to thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you.